And with that, we'll go ahead and get started on the presentation. So we'll begin by just briefly introducing ourselves. And my name is Alex Markin, and I'm a researcher here at AIR and a technical assistance provider for the Progress Center. I work with two of our partnership sites located in Rhode Island, and I am also involved in developing the modules and some other resources that you may have heard about during the conference thus far. And Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello. Hi, I'm Stacy Hurt, based out of Columbia, Missouri. I also work with AIR, and I serve as a knowledge development researcher, a mouthful, for the Progress Center. So really helping get that research to practice. Excited to be here.
Thank you, Stacy. And Nicole is our other presenter today. So Nicole, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Nicole Bucca. I'm here. I'm a Progress Center advisor. In my professional role, I do MTSS implementation work and support that, supporting educators and administrators in Rhode Island. And as you might have noticed earlier, I'm also a parent of 2 children with IEPs.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. We're thrilled that you've been able to join us today. And for our session, our outcomes are to increase knowledge and awareness of some challenges that families experience in navigating the IEP process, and to share some tools that schools and districts can use to increase that family caregiver knowledge and confidence, and how families can support the development and implementation of high quality educational programs for their child with a disability. And then we'll also spotlight how Rhode Island is working to help local educators improve family engagement. So we've introduced ourselves, and we would love to hear more about who's been joining us this afternoon. So we're going to launch a poll, and if you could please include what's your current role that led you to this session. So are you a special educator, a general educator, an administrator, parent, or if you have another role, then go ahead and put that in the chat because we would love to hear. Let's see the results. So similar to our last session, actually, about half of everyone in the room are special educators, a couple administrators, and we have some others, including nonprofit nature education and programs, paraprofessional teacher's aide, school psychologist, special education consultant, and parent. And so welcome. We are so thrilled to have so many different diverse rooms and roles and perspectives joining us today. And we're also going to do a quick breakout session. So we'll be putting you all into groups of 2 to 3. And during that time, take a moment to briefly introduce yourself. And a prompt to consider is sharing a strategy that has worked for you to help enhance parent and school collaboration. So in those various different experiences that we just referenced, if there's any strategies that you found to be particularly successful or helpful to make that collaboration and communication better, we would love to hear that. And when we come back, we'll put it all in the chat so that everybody can learn from one another and share those strategies. So with that, Stephanie is going to go ahead and put us in breakouts. To hear what types of strategies you all talked about in your breakout session. So go ahead and put in the chat any strategies that you found to be particularly effective or that anyone else in your group shared that you think others would like to learn from. We can always use more strategies. I see Nicole said being a good listener, having common goals, having informal conversations, less intimidating early questionnaires, being community-oriented as opposed to hierarchical. Absolutely. Thanks for adding that, Nicole. And for those that have just joined us as we come back from our breakout rooms, we would just love to hear what types of strategies you all discuss in your breakout sessions. So if you could add them to the chat so that everyone has the benefit of learning from you, that would be wonderful. A couple additions: empowering parents because they know their child best. Absolutely.
I need to give a shout out to Julie, who's taught 30 years. She frames the IEP as an annual celebration. They don't even really call it an IEP. And she said just by that simple tweak of language, she said it's just more inviting and families get really excited to come. I thought that was super cool.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Great. Well, as we continue on, feel free to add some more things in the chat so that everyone is able to hear and learn from one another. And now we are going to turn to highlight some different parent perspective and experiences that we've learned from Progress Center focus groups, as well as highlighting some of the different tools and resources we've created that address some of those various different challenges. So Stacey, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, and I love the IEP, the P's for party, love it. So yes, I'm going to share some of an executive summary. Again, I'm a researcher with the Progress Center, and we partnered with with NCLD and SPAN, a parent advocacy network, to launch focus groups last summer, where we interviewed 35 families to hear about their perspectives and experiences of going through the IEP process. So our goal was to hear about just the development and implementation, successes and challenges, the extent to which they felt the IEP contributed to their child's success, and then also if the IEP met their child's needs. So our next goal was just to share the learning with schools to support the development of future implementation of high quality educational programming. This is why we're here. And again, so Alex, Nicole, and myself, we're going to use this session to tie just 3 tips. I'm not going to share all of them that was identified from our focus group findings. We'll then share 2 progress tools developed for our parents to use, and then resources spotlighted from Rhode Island. So Nicole will get into that. So first up, so this tool to the left, you're going to see an IEP teaming resource for parents. And then to the right, an IEP tip sheet for parents. So both of these are in development. They're not live on our site yet, but they will be coming soon. So we are working as you participate in the session. If you have feedback for these tools, they are fluid. Just drop your thoughts in the chat and we will update them because we do hope to leverage these to all districts. To get this tool, you will need to sign up at the Progress Center website, and it will come in the newsletter for you to access when it goes live. The next slide. So to promote meaningful engagement, this is actually our first tip of 3. On the following slides, you're going to see graphs spotlighting some data. Okay, so we have split it with colors. Next slide, please. For each statement, parents were asked, do you strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree with the following statement. So as we go through the survey responses, just notice the chart split. On the far left will be strongly disagree. On the far right, the purple represents strongly agree. So for the first statement, just hold on this slide for a second. For promoting meaningful engagement, parents were asked, I was meaningfully involved in the development of my child's IEP. I then shared, for example, I feel or felt free to ask questions or offer suggestions as the IEP discussed goals, strengths, supports, and needs of my child. So again, agree or disagree. So when we collected our responses, the majority actually felt that they were meaningfully involved. But if you do the math, 37% did not feel meaningfully involved, which means 1 out of 3 parents did not feel that connection. So one parent actually noted and quoted that she received test scores twice per year as per the testing requirement each quarter for the IEP report card, and then monthly with the attached data charts to support the info. She said at no time did she receive communication, a phone call, an email, maybe just face-to-face contact to share a translation of the data. Just simply, it was printed, mailed, and sent to the home. So tip number 1, and as I share these tips from our Progress parents, please share tips from your own experience, as in what tips for progress do you have for meaningful engagement? So this is what our parents said. They say communicate and collaborate often. The IEP meeting should not be the only time that the team collaborates with parents. Number 2, just ask for parent input. So a couple weeks prior to the IEP meeting, which I'm sure a lot of you have coming up to launch the school year, the team should reach out and just ask the parent for information, whether it be strengths, weaknesses, anything that they want to share with you to help support the IEP development. And last, ensure parents are ready to participate. So prior to the IEP meeting, designate at least one teacher to reach out to the parent and just provide an overview of the structure, what to expect as far as time, who's going to be there. You don't want to have like 10 people sitting at the table without giving the family the heads up, just kind of what to expect. So next, Alex is going to share IEP tip sheet and how it relates with the IEP team.
Absolutely. So one of the tips that Stacy just discussed was ensuring that parents are ready to participate in the IEP meeting. So we've developed a couple of resources to help support them in that. One of these resources is one that can be shared prior to the meeting, and that's this tip sheet for parents, which overviews the roles and members of the IEP team in family-friendly language. And this tool also emphasizes the importance of parents being on the IEP team and is designed to empower them to feel like they can be effective partners in the development of their child's IEP. So that's one such resource. And then the next resource also can be shared prior to the IEP team meeting. And this is designed to help parents prepare for their child's upcoming meeting. And it is a template that gives families an opportunity to reflect on and document their child's strengths and needs, identify goals and priorities, and brainstorm how the school can support their child. And families can bring a copy of this document to reference during the IEP team meeting, as well as share it with the team members prior to the meeting. And then we also created a complementary resource to gather the students' input on their own strengths and needs. Again, that can be looked at prior to the IEP team meeting. And this connects to the discussion that you may have heard during the general session at the start of this morning about empowering students to advocate for themselves. So that is another resource that we've been developing. And to answer, Julie, your question about if it's being developed, it is all of these resources are currently being developed. And right now they're being tested from some parents as well as the partnership sites. So they are not yet ready, but will be hopefully very soon and will be posted on our website once they are. And now we're going to watch a quick Stories from the Classroom video where Dr. David Bateman shares a story of an IEP meeting that serves as a reminder of how important that family input and perspective is to the development and implementation of an IEP that meets the child's needs. And so with that, Stephanie, if you could go ahead and launch that video, please.
Stories from the Classroom, Hearing Parents' Priorities. David Bateman relays a story from an IEP meeting where the IEP team shifts focus based on parent input. It serves as a reminder that the team's purpose is to address all of the individual needs of the child.
I attended a meeting 2 years ago, in the old days when we actually had face-to-face meetings, set up a very good reading IEP for a child. I've gone through with all the T's were crossed, all the I's were dotted, everything was good. And it was about third, fourth week into September about this and things like this. And we said, parent, tell me about your child. It was a third grade girl. I remember this very specifically, because the parent says, I know we're here to talk about reading, but my daughter has no friends. No one sits with my daughter. No one interacts with my daughter. My daughter's 9 years of age. She doesn't want to come to school anymore. So we changed the focus of the meeting. Luckily we had the child's teacher there. We started more group activities, more peer groups, more shared activities, kinds of things. What can we do to force in all interactions, not just with one, but rotating throughout the classroom? We reconvened the IEP meeting 3 weeks later, and we asked, so how are things going? And the mother said, things are much better. There's someone who sits with my daughter on the playground. Someone's invited her to sit with her on the bus. Someone plays with her at lunch, things like this. My daughter now wants to come to school. Let's talk about reading now. Okay? And you have to pay attention to the needs of the child and pay attention to what the parents are hearing, things like this. And I understand there's times you have timelines, you have to get these things, but that was a very real need that we had to address. And you have to do these things because you're not going to address reading if the kid's not coming to school. Mm-hmm. So, but it forces me to, it reminds me, we're there to talk about a child. We're not there to talk about a paperwork compliance document. We're there to talk about a child. So.
David Bateman is a Progress Center advisor who brings extensive expertise in special education law and working with schools and districts to support students with disabilities.
I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and it looks like this video has resonated with some of you, which is great. And we also thought that it was a good example of how, had the team been able to ask the parent in advance of the meeting for some input, that they could have received that information earlier, and it might have improved the efficiency of the response even more. And so we just think that that also highlights some of the need for some of these resources. And I saw in the chat that some of you have similar things that you already utilize, but if you don't, these resources will be coming soon for you to use in your school or district. With that, we'll turn to our next tip, Stacy.
I attended.
Yeah, so David Bateman's video, first of all, I love David, but it's a perfect segue into tip number 2, which is engage families in determining individualization of supports, right? Or just listening. So when our parents were given the statement, overall, I found the academic, behavioral, and social emotional supports my child received helped facilitate their success in school. The answers were, Stephanie, do you mind? Results indicated that less than half, or 43% of the parents and caregivers found the academic, behavioral, and social emotional supports their child received facilitated school success. So way less than half. Further, some parents noted the support their child received did not match their child's disability or academic needs. So many families commented that it was just kind of like a cookie cutter, generic support plan. They also shared that many accommodations were based on what was available at the district, not necessarily what was appropriate. The next slide. A couple of families shared a couple of their experiences, one being, I would agree that the school does not understand his disability and does not have appropriate methodologies to meet his needs. Another parent was quoted as saying, special education is not meant to be a lifelong sentence. It is a support service to build and improve skill deficits. Students should exit special education. Special education is too focused on being compliant for procedures versus providing faith. So many of our families, their main point was that they had a child that they were sending to school every day, and schools tended to focus on the compliance and the IEP, not necessarily their child. So really opening up that communication with families and engaging families to determine supports is necessary. So on the next slide, as I share our progress parents, what they said, their tips, will you please drop in the chat what is working for your districts as far as engaging families? So our progress parents shared that ask the parents, what services and supports have worked for your child? What supports have not worked? And just ask them, what do you suggest? What should we try? And try a few things. As you know, you can implement interventions, and what works for one kid may not work for another. And last, help families understand how services are individualized and designed based on their child's unique needs. So parents are not a fan of blanket plans. We know we have all this beautiful software to help with IEP goals and doing progress monitoring, but families really want data and goals that match their child's needs. So now Alex is going to share how this pairs with the IEP team meeting guide for parents.
Great, thanks, Stacy. So on your screen is a screenshot of our parent meeting guide for families. And one of the tips that Stacey just discussed was the importance of getting that parent input, and that also connects to the stories from the classroom video that we watched with David Bateman. And the meeting guide is intended to empower parents to share their thoughts, questions, and feedback during the IEP meeting. So it helps provide a family member a place to place notes before the meeting that they can share, as well as include some prompting questions that they can ask during the meeting. And also helps to bridge that complex education language by linking throughout the guide some different resources that families can access if they have questions about a particular component or element of their child's IEP. And this next slide provides one such example. And so you may have seen these referenced over the course of the conference. This is an example of one of our IEP tip sheets. And this one's talking specifically about the overview of statement of services and aids. And it describes for parents so they can see what IDEA says about each of the components of the IEP, but it uses some more family-friendly language about what that actually means so that they're able to better understand what that component of their child's IEP is about. And we'll take a look at that pre-meeting guide, one of those subsections, in a couple of moments.
Which brings us to tip number 3. And we talk a lot about data, but provide regular and meaningful access to progress data. So for this question, we ask parents, I regularly receive data how my child was progressing towards his or her IEP goals. So less than 34% of the respondents shared that they regularly receive data about their child's progress, which means, right, less than 34%, that's 1 in 3. So one parent noted progress monitoring was lacking. It was often anecdotal or observational. Thus, it was not meaningful. So I'm going to share tips from our progress parents. And as I share, please drop in some ideas from your own district of what's working for you. But our parent progress tips are: 1, establish a standardized schedule for updating parents that outlines the format and frequently sharing data. So we hope this is not just during the IEP or party or celebration. And we do hope it's more than just 4 times a year. So when I was in the classroom, I had a systematic schedule where I actually talked to my families almost weekly, but I had a set block of time monthly that I had as optional if families wanted to come in, or we would engage in, Zoom or some type of, that they had that block of time if they wanted to meet. So just establish that schedule for the year and know that your door is always open. Next, ensure that parents understand the data and what it means. We just can't just give them the data and expect them to translate all the acronyms and all the terminology throughout, but walk them through that first couple times and, ask, do you have any questions? Keep it formal. Those IEPs are pretty intimidating, but just keeping, if they have any questions, be there to answer it. So Alex is going to share how this bridges to the IEP team meeting guide for parents.
Yes, so in the team meeting guide, one of the tips that Stacey was discussing was around ensuring that parents understand the data and how it's being shared and what it means. So within the meeting guide for families, one of the sections focuses on measurable annual goals and how progress will be measured. So this section gives some questions for parents to consider asking during their child's IEP meeting, such as, how will I know if my child's making progress towards their goals? And how often and in what format will I be informed of my child's progress? And then they can take some notes during that meeting as well, so that they can make sure that they're understanding, and the school can make sure that the parents understanding what types of data they'll be looking at and how it will be shared. And then if the parents still have some questions, they could click on one of those hyperlinks in the guide there, which will bring them to our tip sheet. And so this is another example talking about measuring progress towards annual goals. And so this tip sheet talks again about what IDEA requires, and then includes some tips for implementation that both families and staff could benefit from referring to. So you could see things to do and then things to avoid on this particular tip sheet. And it can, again, help bridge that gap in common language, thinking about that federal level to the IEP team. And so this is a resource that is directly linked within the meeting guide itself. And I'm also just seeing in the chat some examples that people had, Stacy, to your question about this. And so one person talked about sitting with parents to go over report cards and progress notes and being able to look at the data together, and knowing that, you know, paperwork and data can be daunting to educators and even more so to parents who perhaps have less of that foundational knowledge. And so that's a nice opportunity to both see what educators understand and what the parents understand or perhaps don't understand, having that collaborative conversation. So I just wanted to highlight that as a tip from the chat. And with that, we're going to turn and hear about how a state goes about supporting their districts in this work. And so Nicole's going to talk about all of the fantastic work they're doing in Rhode Island.
Thank you, Alex. Nicole Bucca, that's my name, and you know, so far our presentation has really been a lot about how we support parents, which of course we do need to support parents. But my role in Rhode Island is that I support educators and administrators with making this vision a reality. How do we make supporting parents a global, scale-upable reality in our state? Stephanie, if you could move to the next slide. Okay, so in our work, we align to a body of research that has been conceptualized into what they call the dual capacity framework. And I can sum it up pretty simply. What it says is that when we look into the research as to why we struggle with family engagement with schools, that we find that we have a dual capacity problem, right? That it's not just families over here on the right-hand column of the visual that we have some barriers for, and we know families sometimes haven't seen models of strong family engagement. We know some families have a negative history of engagement with their schools and educators, or maybe even their own childhood of school was not a positive experience. They also might have already had experiences in your school district that were negative before they even came to you, where they felt unheard or disrespected. So we know that's one side of the coin, but that another side of the coin here on the left-hand side is that educators equally have some struggles in their ability to engage, and I don't just mean teachers, I mean the entire team and administrators, in their ability to engage with families. Pre-service training, administrative training doesn't have enough family engagement aspects to it. When we train, a lot of times it's very much about either just the family or just the educators without sort of putting the two pieces together. And I think this bottom bullet here is really important, that culturally sometimes our field has developed a real deficit mindset about families for whom kids have the most complex profiles. And I think that has a lot to do with our inability here in the dual capacity, right? That when two sides both struggle to do something, it's very natural to sort of see the other one as the problem. So I think that what we're doing in our platform of supporting administrators is trying to address both of these things. So I'd like to show you that. Stephanie, if you could move to the next slide. So we have moved our training and technical assistance to a blended model. And in our blended model, we have courses online supporting our educators. So the course you are seeing in front of you on our Rhode Island State website called Bridge RI is a Tier 3 systems course. It's teaming for intensive intervention. In our state, as we hope yours is, students with IEPs, it's not a place, it's not a tier, they're serviced everywhere, and that an intensive intervention meeting can be about a student with an IEP, as well as it can be about a student who doesn't have an IEP. So in this course, Stephanie, if you could go to the next slide, we have a section of the course that's specific to family engagement. So after we've taught teachers and team members their roles, and we've acknowledged that parents are an active role on the team as well, we then go into trying to support that dual capacity. So here in this page right here of a book that you're seeing, we're sharing with the staff that we really want to look at our families as assets. They are vessels of strength, okay, and that many parents report not feeling that way. And so this is an empathy interview from the Pacer Center with a parent named Maria, who is also new to the country. She's an immigrant, and she also experiences a little bit of struggle with the language. And so in this really short video, what we're doing is we're training our staff to think about what it's like to be on the other side of the table. And this parent does a really lovely job in this interview saying that not only is the culture of American schools very different than the culture of the schools from her native country, but that in addition, she's trying to learn about this culture without translated resources, without a translator present, without the ability to bridge the language barrier. And then we go into what she offered as ideas for that. And so, Stephanie, if you can go to the next slide. So, as we're helping educators in our training and administrators understand parents a little better, right, dual capacity, we then try to give them templates of tools and resources so that every district does not have to reinvent the wheel. So here you can see the intensive intervention infographic overview from the National Center, and we have it in English, Spanish, and since this screenshot, we have also produced it in Portuguese and Chinese, because these are some of the top languages in our state. And we tend to provide it in a format that it can be adapted for each school district as well. So share the parent perspective, help the educators relate, give them tools and resources to support families. If you go to the next slide, Stephanie. Now we're moving into another parent, and this parent is also a Pacer Center short video where this parent has 2 children with disabilities, and he basically starts by saying, okay, 5 years in, what have you learned? What advice would you give to other families? And this gentleman did a really great job of saying, you know, when I was new to this country and I was new to this American school system and having a child with a disability, he said, you know, in my culture, I do home, right? The parent is in charge of home, and educators are in charge of school. And to be respectful, you respect that boundary. Right? That's culturally what he was taught. And, you know, he in this video in 2 minutes really nicely describes that, you know, what he would say to parents now is that's wrong from his experience, in the sense that he said, I have come to learn that the school can't really know my child as deeply unless I'm engaging with them and really sharing that piece, and that it's not keep them separate, it's really respect each other but bring them together. And so from there, Stephanie, if you want to promote, we again provide the educators resources as templates to make this a reality. So if I'm having a meeting on a student with an IEP who maybe the progress on their goal hasn't been exactly where we want it to be, and let's say I have that parent that was in that last video, you can see that the agenda that I can share in advance so that they can process it in advance of the meeting clearly outlines what's going to happen in the meeting. It says at the top the child and family role if the child's present as well, and it very parent friendly states what the parent could be doing at each step of the meeting process. And so again, we provide it in translated versions, the most common languages, again trying to support the schools and educators to not have to reinvent the wheel. We're helping both families and educators to have the ability to collaborate. Stephanie, if you could promote the next one. And then we have the issue of working parents and parents who cannot make a meeting, you know, during a contractual workday, which is a very common issue. And another support that we created that's a template because the field needed it was, you know, we would say, okay, well, if the parent can't come, can we do a pre-meeting phone call? Okay. And what I came to learn was that besides the fact that teachers aren't given a lot of time, or educators time to make phone calls, that's a whole nother problem, but was that actually the educators were intimidated by phone calls as much as the parents. Similar to the parents, a lot of educators had poor experiences, right, where we didn't build the relationship first. We didn't have a positive contact first, and then we called home because there was a problem. Now the family, who's used to only getting phone calls when there's a problem, is not very receptive to that phone call, and maybe it doesn't go well. So in this parent phone call template that is in the training that I was just describing to you, you know, we explain that there are best practices with family engagement and that this tool lays some of them out. You can see on the left hand side it says very clearly, make a point of your first communication always being a positive one. Start early in the year. Some people do a postcard. Some people do a phone call, you know, one per Wednesday per week in the beginning. Make it a schedule. You could do a letter. You could do a variety of things, but that we want to make sure the first time we reach out, it's not a problem. Then on the right hand side, you can see that when we're reaching out because we're actually having a tier 3 or intensive intervention meeting or a progress meeting for a child with an IEP, we are calling because there's kind of a problem, and we're wanting the parent input because we're problem solving. So this script lays out the best practices again, right? State your name, make sure you're asking if it's a good time to talk, right? So we're showing respect for the family that this might be a bad time. We're going to make sure we share a little something about the student that's personal, that shows that, we really know their child. And then we're going to state the challenge objectively, right? So there's no deficit mindset. There's no judgment of the family. Absences has been a problem with our ability to instruct here. Okay, there's no, why aren't you getting our child to school, right? So we're very objective. And then we move into, you can see where it says being objective. I feel strongly that your input and expertise is really important. You know your child best. Have you seen this before? What worked? And I think that what's happening is that using a phone call script like this, be it whatever professional in the building, really just promotes some communicative best practices to ensure that the other person feels heard and respected, so that the communication is a strong one and it doesn't become this. Stephanie, if you can promote the next slide. So I hope that you enjoyed, an illustration of how Rhode Island is really striving to support the educators and administrators in how to make this empowerment of families and positive interactions with families quality ones, recognizing that both families need support and so do our educators. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And if you'd like some links to get the copies of that agenda and the phone script template that Nicole just shared, those are also in the chat. So it's you'll just have to scroll up a little bit, but they're right in there for you. And as Stacey mentioned, please feel free to make copies of those and to modify them to best fit your context. And with that, we want to give an opportunity to answer some of your questions. So take a moment and think if there's any questions that you would like to get some input on from our team, then feel free to add those in the chat and we'll take a moment to look at those and discuss those together. And I want to highlight, while everyone's thinking about that, Julie added in the chat about the 10 dimensions of belongingness and how that connects to what we're talking about here in terms of engaging with families and students, and that everyone's working with the same goal. And I just think that that is such a wonderful takeaway and connection. So thank you for adding that, Julie, to the chat.
And something that we discussed in the last session, but for the benefit of the current participants that weren't there, was also a lot about how, whatever is that common end goal, and you mentioned it earlier when you said the David Bateman example, is just making sure that we have that pre-shared can really reduce a whole lot of the just not being on the same page and getting a little bit of a lost in translation moment.
And similarly, Nicole, there's no new questions yet, but one that we did discuss in our last section that perhaps we could discuss again here for those who may have a similar question was around any strategies or tips for communicating with families where it's hard to get in contact with them. So any tips for that situation?
Well, I was sharing last session that home visits are a chronically underutilized and very effective approach, and that my first teaching job was in a very impoverished area that had a lot of unique challenges. People were evicted frequently, phone numbers were not updated, there were a lot of times where you could not get a hold of a parent. And so obviously one of the first things I would do was ask the student. Sometimes the student, because I taught high school, sometimes the student could tell me how to better reach their parent. But the next thing I would do would be a home visit. And back then I used to do it on my own. Now I would recommend just bring somebody else with you. But I would say I have had nothing but positive experiences from that in several situations. Not only did I always find the family very receptive to me, which I think there's a fear that you won't be well received, I was well received, and on top of that I learned a lot lot about the child that I would have never known. And I had some very, I had one family that had very negative experiences K through 9 before they met me, who completely turned around once I took the time to go into their space and to just be human with them and to, you know, just talk with them. And from then on out, they came to the building and they were communicative and connecting with me. And I just can't stress enough the importance of meeting them where they're at. And if that's their home, if that's out in the community, the library, a coffee shop, well then, you know, I think it's an important part of our job. And I do recognize that it was above and beyond, but I would just say it was very effective.
And a follow-up question, and Stacey, I'm sure you may have something to add, but how do you find the time? Knowing that the importance of those home visits, how do you find the time to make those?
Mara, that's a really fair question. I mean, in both of those examples, I did not yet have children, and I was a young educator, and I really, my job was very much, you know, so I do respect that what you're saying is a true challenge. That in that point in my life, I had more time, but I did go right after school on my way home. I think that nowadays, you know, if I think about fast forwarding to where I'm at now, I actually find administrators in most of the buildings that I worked in my career, if I had approached them and said I needed coverage to go do something of that matter, I actually think that they would try to identify how to do that. I'm not sure I really asked for what I needed sometimes. But yeah, you're right though. It's a fair question, and also I think that there are some schools in our state that are charter schools that serve vulnerable populations, like that is their target audience, and for them they actually build in home visit days. So I do understand what you're saying, and I agree with you that I'm not sure I have great answers there.
Yeah, this probably isn't the best answer, but I did have a kid when I was doing home visits, and I designated one evening a month and I would stack my home visits. There was 4 that were not optional. I needed to put in that time. And honestly, I got that time back. I would say like during the day with the kid, because the child saw that I was taking the time to visit their family. And I would say I just made gains in the classroom and got that evening back. And I don't know if there's really a way around it, but I would just kind of delegate and get coverage with my own family members to cover my son while I was taking the time to meet with, you know, other people's children. But I do think it's important.
Can I say something really quick, or am I not allowed to talk?
No, go ahead.
So I actually have, at the beginning of my career, I did have children already, but I did do it. And I found it exactly like all of you are saying. I mean, it was very beneficial, but I was also working in a high intensive unit. So I only had like 8 kids. But when you talk about having, you know, 12, 15, 20, I mean, depending on what your caseload is, like, it's just, it's a lot harder to get, I feel like, to get to all those people. And so, like you said, some people are open to it. Some people don't even want it. If they don't want it, you're not going to force it. So I want to figure out how to do it, because I do feel like I knew the kids better. I mean, I have to be very honest. You see them in a different way. You know their preferences, especially the lower kids. So thank you guys for your input. You did help me. Just remember how much it helps you in the room when you have the kid in the classroom.
Thank you. And I would, you know, the only thing I would say, which I'm sure you're probably already doing, but for the benefit of, there are people in the room that might be newer, right, is it's almost like if you think about the home piece also as a communicative multi-tiered system, right? So when we're talking about a home visit, while in a perfect world, we would love that to be tier 1, something that we do for every child on our caseload, every child that we serve. Realistically, we probably can't do that. So what is the data that we use to identify a student for whom, you know, our lower intensity methods have not been effective or just have not worked, and really, you know, to Stacy's point, made those 3 non-negotiable. I have to visit those 3 or those 2, whereas the other ones maybe, you know, we could, because I definitely didn't home visit every one of my students. Like these were unique situations, and but man, if I could have home visited more, I would have. It was very valuable. But you're right. I mean, realistically, but making sure that we're doing it with the ones for whom it was the most needed and most urgent.
We had another question earlier in the chat, but there's been some back and forth within, but I just wanted to highlight in case there is something else that we'd like to discuss as a group. And that's about that balance between involving parents and also bogging them down. So when you need a lot of information from them, questionnaires, and there's lots of meetings and things like that, how do we kind of balance the need to keep families informed, but not overwhelming them?
Oh my gosh, I just want to say whoever put that forth, like, love you. I am a full-time working mom. I'm a school board member on top of that. The number of emails, oh God, the number of emails I get in any given day from wraparound providers, home-based therapists, doctors, IEPs. I mean, it is unreal. You know, I think that all I can offer is A, validation that you are so right, and thank you so much for bringing that up. And B is that, you know, as a school board member and someone who's trying to be influential in my own district, I have really tried to encourage people to look at our communication from the perspective of the parent and the family, right? It's very easy for me, school psychologist, to say, I need this, right? Case manager needs this, principal needs this, right? And not to say, how many things did we just send at that one parent in this one period of time, right? And did we really use it, or is this just a formality? And I think that the more we can take that perspective and streamline it, you know, there are things I receive every year that I'm confident not a soul looks at. I'm confident it gets put in a file. Why can't it be electronic, and if there's no changes, click a box here? You know what I mean? Like, I think that those are systems issues, and they're systems issues that technology can really assist us with. And I think that you need the perspective from the parent lens of what we could do to reduce those things.
Nicole, to that point about thinking of how to make it easier for parents, one person added in the chat a tip that they did was potentially, you know, taking that time to fill out any forms or questionnaires with the parent over the phone if needed. If it's difficult for them to find that time, you know, doing that together and kind of dedicating that moment to completing those paperwork can also be a helpful resource. Another tip that I wanted to highlight from the chat.
And I've never seen anybody do this, but I think they should, is like a communication calendar. I mean, how many of you, I literally take off the first 2 days of school from my job, because the number of things that are sent home times 2 kids with IEPs in the first 2 days is so ungodly. Like the first year I got it all done, I was like, I'm like mom of the year over here, right? But I think that even if you could just space things out a little differently, why does everything have to happen in the first 2 weeks of school? You know what I mean? When as it is, I'm trying to get my kid to get up for the first time since, you know, 2 weeks into August.
Great. Well, these were great questions, great comments, and fantastic tips that have been in the chat. So if you haven't been able to keep up with the chat, I encourage you to take a quick look at that because there's some wonderful strategies that people have used in their classrooms that I think are really helpful. We're going to turn to just wrapping up here as we come up to the end of our presentation. Some additional resources that I wanted to highlight for you. So you can find some of these different resources that we've been talking about today on our Progress Center website. Specifically, the Development tab has sections for each component of the IEP, and from there you can access tip sheets that we've referenced already over the course of our conversation, as well as some modules and things like that that might be helpful. So I highly suggest that you check those out if you're interested. And then you can always find your Parent Center at parentcenterhub.org if you would like to access some additional resources. And I know that we've talked about some tools that we're developing that aren't quite ready yet. So again, if you would like to access those once they are, you can sign up to join our mailing list. I saw that some of you have already done that over the course of our conversation, which is fantastic. But just go to the Progress Center website and then you can put in your email address. And as resources are available, we will be posting about those, as well as upcoming events. We typically, over the course of the school year, have several different webinars and things like that on various topics that you may be interested in. So sign up for that so that you can continue to be involved in the Progress Centered. And a disclaimer that the materials for this session have been produced under the U.S. Department of Education, but the views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education, and none of the products, commodities, services, or enterprises mentioned have been officially endorsed and should not be inferred as being endorsed. But with that, we thank you all so much for spending your afternoon with us. We hope that you've gotten some tools and some strategies that might be helpful, and we wish you the very best